The Dark Secret of Blackwood Sanatorium. The year was 1803. America was still young and finding its way. Back then, doctors didn't know much about treating sick minds. Science mixed with old beliefs and superstitions. This strange mix was nowhere more clear than at Blackwood Sanatorium. The place sat deep in the swamps of South Carolina, always covered in thick mist that seemed to hide dark secrets. In those days, people with mental troubles were often locked away. Families with money would send their sick relatives to special places that promised cures. These families would pay anything to fix their loved ones' minds, not caring how it was done. On a foggy morning in March, Dr. Elias Montgomery came to Blackwood. The trip from Charleston took 3 days by horse and wagon. The last few miles were on roads that were barely roads at all. Montgomery was only 26 years old. He had just finished medical school at the University of Pennsylvania 6 months before. His teachers said he was very smart and kind, something rare for doctors back then. As his wagon reached the top of the last hill, Blackwood Sanatorium appeared through the fog like a ghost. It was a big 3-story building made of old red brick and dark wood. The windows looked black in the pale morning light. Smaller buildings sat around it, connected by gravel paths that disappeared into the forest. The whole place looked like it had been carved out of the wilderness by force. "We're here, sir," said the wagon driver. He was a quiet man who had barely spoken during the whole trip from Charleston. His weathered face showed no feeling, though Montgomery thought he seemed relieved to be done with this job. Montgomery grabbed his medical bag and stepped down. The air was thick and smelled of wet earth and decay. In the distance, a bell rang 6 times. Its sad sound seemed to cut through the mist itself. A group of black crows flew up from a nearby oak tree, their harsh cries drowning out the bell's fading sound. "I'll get your trunks, doctor," said the driver, not looking at Montgomery's eyes. The man's hands shook a little when they got near Montgomery's medical bag, as if the healing tools inside made him nervous. "Thank you," Montgomery replied, pulling his coat tighter against the morning cold. "Tell me, have you brought many doctors to this place?" The driver stopped, his hand on a trunk strap. A shadow crossed his face, quickly hidden. "Some come, few leave," he said. Without saying more, he went back to work, moving faster now, as if he wanted to finish and get away before the mist got thicker. Montgomery frowned but said nothing more. He had heard whispers about Blackwood during his time in Philadelphia. People said it treated the worst cases of mental illness people others had given up on. The man who ran it, Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, was a mystery in medical circles. He rarely wrote papers, but people spoke of him with both respect and fear. Some claimed he worked miracles. Others hinted that his methods crossed the line of what was right. The front door of the sanatorium opened, and a tall figure came out. Montgomery squared his shoulders and walked forward, knowing that first impressions would be important in this isolated place. "Dr. Montgomery, I assume," called the man. His voice was surprisingly musical for someone so big. "I am Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood. We have been waiting for your arrival." The man looked like a gentleman. His clothes were perfectly made, and he carried a silver-headed walking cane. He looked older than Montgomery had expected, maybe in his 60s, with white hair and sharp gray eyes that seemed to judge Montgomery in a single look. His clothes were perfect. A black wool coat, silk vest, and a tie held with a pearl pin that caught the weak morning light. "The pleasure is mine, Dr. Blackwood," Montgomery replied, noticing how cold the man's handshake was. It wasn't the cold of poor blood flow that old people often had, but something else, as if Blackwood lacked the warmth that lived in normal people. "Your invitation was unexpected but greatly appreciated," Montgomery continued. "Your paper on treating brain fevers caught my attention," said Blackwood, guiding him toward the entrance with a hand on his shoulder. "Your idea of cooling inflamed brains through controlled cold instead of bleeding was very forward-thinking. Come, let me show you to your room. You must be tired from your journey." As they entered the front hall, Montgomery was surprised by the contrast between the building's dark outside and its elegant inside. The floors were polished marble. The walls had oil paintings in fancy frames. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the space, lighting up delicate furniture that would fit in the finest Charleston homes. The air smelled of candle wax and something else, a medical smell Montgomery couldn't identify. "We believe that beauty helps heal troubled minds," explained Blackwood, noticing Montgomery's surprise. "Our patients come from the finest families in the South. They expect comfort even in their sickness. Don't you agree?" "Indeed," Montgomery replied carefully, though his training had taught him that medical places should be simple and practical. "And how many patients live here now?" 37 at present," replied Blackwood, leading him past a grand staircase toward a hallway lined with portrait paintings of stern-looking men. Montgomery assumed these were previous physicians. "Though we can hold 50. The east wing is for female patients, the west for males. Your room is in the doctor's house behind the main building. You'll share the space with our 2 other doctors, though I'm afraid Dr. Harrison is away on family business." As they walked, Montgomery noticed staff members in clean uniforms moving through the hallways. They all nodded respectfully to Blackwood but kept their eyes down, never meeting his gaze directly. Montgomery found this strange. In his experience, medical staff usually treated each other more equally, regardless of their jobs. "When might I meet the patients?" Montgomery asked, eager to begin judging Blackwood's methods. The invitation had mentioned revolutionary treatments and amazing success rates, claims Montgomery wanted to see for himself. "All in good time, my dear colleague," Blackwood said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. There was something calculated in his expression, as if each gesture was carefully planned. "Tomorrow, perhaps. Tonight you will dine with me and Dr. Bennett. There is much to discuss about our unique methods. I prefer my doctors to understand our philosophy before seeing the practical applications." They went outside through a side door and crossed a small garden to a handsome 2-story building made of the same weathered brick as the main building. Montgomery noticed the garden contained unusual plants. Many had known healing properties. Others he recognized as having folk connections to protection against evil influences. An interesting mix of science and superstition, he thought, not uncommon in rural medical practice. "Here we are," announced Blackwood, pushing open the door. "Your room is on the 2nd floor, east side. Your trunks should already be there. Dinner is served at 7 in my private dining room. Until then, rest and refresh yourself. The journey from Charleston is hard, especially this time of year when the roads are soft from spring rains." With that, Blackwood left, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the gravel path as he returned to the main building. Montgomery stood for a moment, watching the older doctor's retreating figure, struck by a strange feeling that he had just passed some kind of test whose rules he didn't understand. Montgomery climbed the stairs, his medical bag heavy in his hand. The wooden steps creaked under his weight, each sound echoing in the silence of the doctor's house. The building had the unlived-in feel of a place designed more for looks than comfort. Beautiful furniture arranged with mathematical precision, lacking the small signs of life that transform a house into a home. His room was larger than expected, furnished with a 4-poster bed, writing desk, wardrobe, and a small sitting area near a window that looked out over the grounds. His trunks had indeed arrived, placed neatly at the foot of the bed. The room was comfortable but impersonal, like an elegant hotel room prepared for a guest who would soon leave. On the desk sat a leather-bound book with no title on its spine. The rich leather was decorated with intricate patterns that looked, on closer inspection, like intertwined snakes. Curious, Montgomery opened it to find a handwritten manuscript. The first page had the title, "On the Life-Giving Properties of Vital Essences, a Revolutionary Approach to Mental Illnesses." The author was Thaddeus Blackwood. The handwriting was precise and flowing. Each letter was formed with the confidence of a man used to having his words preserved and studied. Montgomery settled into the chair and began to read, interested in this chance to understand Blackwood's theories before their evening discussion. The manuscript detailed Blackwood's theory that mental illnesses came from an imbalance of vital essences in the blood. This wasn't entirely new. The idea that disease came from unbalanced body fluids was ancient, but Blackwood's particular interpretation contained ideas Montgomery found both fascinating and troubling. Traditional treatments like bloodletting, Blackwood argued, only made the problem worse by removing what little life force remained in the patient. The usual practice of purging the body of corrupt fluids was, according to Blackwood, completely wrong. "We do not heal the starving man by taking away more food," he wrote. "So why do we believe that draining the life essences of the mentally ill will restore their balance?" Instead, Blackwood proposed a radical alternative, putting fresh vital essences directly into the patient's system. He claimed remarkable success with this method, citing cases of severe depression, mania, and even catatonia completely cured within weeks of beginning treatment. Patient testimonials filled several pages, each telling of transformation from hopelessness to recovery through Blackwood's revolutionary approach. What troubled Montgomery was how vague Blackwood's description of these vital essences was. The manuscript referred to a special preparation without revealing what it was made of or how it was given. The scientific imprecision contrasted sharply with the detailed case histories and theoretical framework. It was as though Blackwood deliberately hid the most critical aspect of his treatment method. The manuscript contained several anatomical drawings showing the blood circulation system with particular emphasis on the vessels of the brain. Notes in Blackwood's hand indicated points of maximum absorption and pathways of vital transmission. Montgomery found the accuracy of the anatomical drawings impressive. Blackwood clearly knew human body structure well, which made the mystical language surrounding his vital essences all the more puzzling. A knock at the door interrupted his reading. Montgomery closed the manuscript and called, "Enter." A young man in servant's clothes stepped into the room. He was perhaps 20 with the pale complexion of someone who spent little time in the sun. "Dr. Bennett sends his compliments, sir, and asks if you would join him in the laboratory before dinner. He thought you might like a tour of the facilities." The servant's manner was respectful to the point of timidity, his eyes never rising above Montgomery's chest. "Of course," Montgomery replied, rising from his chair, glad for the chance to see more of the sanatorium's operation. "Lead the way, if you please." The servant guided him back to the main building and down a hallway Montgomery hadn't seen during his earlier tour with Blackwood. They passed through what appeared to be the administrative section of the sanatorium, offices where clerks kept patient records and handled mail, and into an older part of the building. Here the elegant decoration gave way to more practical surroundings. They went down a flight of stone steps into what must have been the basement level. The temperature dropped noticeably with each step. The air grew cooler, and the elegant decoration of the upper floors gave way to plain stone walls and iron holders with oil lamps whose flames cast dancing shadows on the rough-cut stone. The passage felt like a much older structure, as though the sanatorium had been built on the foundations of some previous building with a completely different purpose. At the end of the hallway stood a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. The servant knocked 3 times in a distinct pattern, 2 quick knocks followed by a third after a brief pause. Montgomery noted the sequence, recognizing it as a security measure rather than mere politeness. The door swung open to reveal a middle-aged man with glasses and thinning brown hair. His face had the distracted expression of someone whose mind constantly worked on multiple problems at once. "Ah, you must be Dr. Montgomery," he said with a slight stammer. "Do come in. I'm Dr. Jeremiah Bennett." He wiped his hands on a cloth tucked into his vest, leaving faint reddish stains that Montgomery couldn't help but notice. Montgomery entered a large room that could only be described as part laboratory, part pharmacy. Glass containers of various shapes lined wooden shelves, many containing liquids of different colors: amber, red, deep purple. A long table dominated the center of the room, covered with instruments of brass and silver whose purposes Montgomery could only guess at. Several smaller tables held what appeared to be distillation equipment with liquids of different colors bubbling gently over small flames carefully controlled by clockwork mechanisms. "Impressive," said Montgomery, genuinely amazed at how advanced the equipment was. Some pieces he recognized from his medical training. Others seemed custom-designed for purposes he couldn't immediately figure out. "I haven't seen such an extensive laboratory outside of Philadelphia. Your distillation equipment in particular is very advanced. Dr. Blackwood spares no expense when it comes to advancing our understanding of the mind's illnesses," replied Bennett. visibly pleased by Montgomery's reaction. His initial nervousness seemed to fade as he moved among his equipment, pointing out various features with the pride of a craftsman. This apparatus, for example, allows us to separate the vital components of our healing solutions with far greater precision than usual methods. Have you had a chance to review his manuscript? I was in the middle of it when your invitation arrived, said Montgomery, moving closer to examine a complex arrangement of glass tubes and copper coils. His theories about vital essences are unusual. Bennett's expression grew serious. His earlier enthusiasm was replaced by something more reverent. Unusual, yes, but the results speak for themselves. Patients who arrived here in chains, lost to madness or despair, now walk our gardens engaged in normal conversation. Families who had given up all hope now look forward to joyful reunions. Dr. Blackwood's insights go beyond traditional medical wisdom. Dr. Montgomery. He sees connections others have missed for centuries. And these results are achieved through giving these vital essences? Montgomery asked, gesturing to the various containers around them. He kept his tone neutral, careful not to reveal the doubt that naturally arose in his scientifically trained mind. Indeed, Bennett replied, moving to a large cabinet at the far end of the room. The cabinet was made of polished mahogany with a glass front, locked with an ornate brass mechanism. He produced a small key from his vest pocket and unlocked it with ceremonial slowness, as though revealing sacred objects to a new member. Inside were dozens of crystal bottles containing a dark red liquid, each labeled with what appeared to be a patient number and date. This, Bennett said with reverence, lifting one of the bottles and holding it to the light, is Dr. Blackwood's miracle. Montgomery stepped closer, examining the bottles. The liquid within was thick, catching the lamp light with a strange shine. It appears to be blood, Montgomery observed carefully. In its most basic form, yes, Bennett acknowledged, carefully returning the bottle to its place. But it has been processed, refined, enhanced with elements that Dr. Blackwood has discovered through years of research. The raw material is merely the starting point. Through our procedures, it is transformed into something far more powerful, the essence of life itself, concentrated and purified. And this is given to the patients? Montgomery asked, unable to keep the doubt from his voice. Blood transfusion was a controversial practice in the medical community, tried occasionally but full of risk. Most attempts ended in the patient's violent reaction to the foreign substance, often resulting in death. A small amount daily, usually mixed with their evening drink, explained Bennett, closing and locking the cabinet. The effects are gradual but undeniable. We begin with tiny doses, carefully watching the patient's response before increasing the amount. Dr. Blackwood has refined the technique over many years, eliminating the bad reactions that plagued earlier experiments in this field. What is the source of this base material? Montgomery asked, choosing his words carefully. He felt an increasing unease about the direction of their conversation, yet professional curiosity compelled him to continue. Bennett hesitated, glancing toward the door as though concerned about being overheard. His earlier enthusiasm dimmed, replaced by a guarded expression. That is a question best directed to Dr. Blackwood himself. He is very particular about certain aspects of our methods. Bennett moved toward another area of the laboratory, his manner suggesting a desire to change the subject. Come, let me show you the rest of our facilities before dinner. We have much more to discuss regarding the practical applications of Dr. Blackwood's theories. The tour continued through several more rooms, a small surgical theater equipped with the latest instruments, a dispensary filled with the usual medicines and mixtures organized with military precision, and finally a locked ward that Bennett referred to only as the source room. He did not offer to show Montgomery its interior, merely indicating its location with a vague gesture before quickly moving on. Montgomery noted that this area was on the opposite side of the basement from the main stairs, accessible only through the laboratory complex, an unusual arrangement that suggested a desire for isolation beyond what medical considerations would normally require. By the time they returned to the main level, the grandfather clock in the front hall was striking 7. Bennett led Montgomery to a private dining room where Blackwood was already seated at the head of a beautifully set table. Crystal glasses and silver service gleamed in the light of many candles, creating an atmosphere of refined elegance at odds with the institutional nature of the sanatorium. "Ah, gentlemen," Blackwood greeted them, rising slightly from his chair with the help of his cane. "I trust Dr. Bennett has shown you our humble facilities, Montgomery." Bennett's enthusiasm for our work is sometimes overwhelming to newcomers, but his dedication is beyond question. "Indeed," replied Montgomery, taking the seat indicated by a waiting servant. The chair was positioned at Blackwood's right hand, a place of honor that reflected his status as the newest arrival. "Most impressive, though I confess I have questions about your treatment methods." "As any good scientist should," Blackwood said with a thin smile, raising his wine glass in a small salute. "We shall discuss it thoroughly over dinner. But first, let us enjoy this excellent meal. Our cook has prepared roast duck with cherry sauce in your honor, a welcome befitting a doctor of your reputation." The meal was indeed excellent, accompanied by fine wines from France and intelligent conversation on a range of topics from European politics to the latest literary works. Blackwood proved himself a perfect host, drawing Montgomery out on his education and previous experiences while sharing stories from his own extensive career. Yet Montgomery couldn't help noticing how both Blackwood and Bennett steered the conversation away from specifics about the sanatorium's treatments whenever he brought up the subject. They spoke freely about their theories regarding mental illnesses, but became vague when discussing their practical applications. It was only after the dessert plates had been cleared and brandy served that Blackwood finally addressed Montgomery's unspoken questions. The servants had withdrawn, leaving the three doctors alone in the dining room. Blackwood leaned back in his chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass with a thoughtful air. "You are wondering about the source of our vital essence," he said, fixing Montgomery with his penetrating gaze. "That is natural. In your position, I would wonder the same." "I am," Montgomery admitted, relieved to finally approach the subject directly. "Blood transfusion is not unknown in medical practice, but it remains experimental and full of risk. Patients often suffer violent reactions, even death, because the blood is given in its raw state," Blackwood countered, setting his glass down with precise movements. "Our process refines it, removes the elements that cause such reactions, while preserving and enhancing those that bring healing. Think of it as distilling the very essence of life, Montgomery. Just as crude oil yields kerosene when properly processed, so does blood yield its vital essence when subjected to our methods." "And the source?" Montgomery pressed, unwilling to be diverted again. "Surely you do not take it from the patients themselves. That would contradict your criticism of traditional bloodletting." Blackwood and Bennett exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them that Montgomery could not interpret. "We maintain a roster of healthy individuals who provide regular donations," Blackwood said smoothly. "They are well compensated and suffer no ill effects from the process. The quantity taken from any one donor is carefully monitored to prevent depletion of their own vital forces." Something in Blackwood's tone made Montgomery doubt this explanation, but he merely nodded, filing away his suspicions for later consideration. The evening had already provided much to think about, and he sensed that pressing further might close doors rather than open them. "Tomorrow you shall observe our treatment protocols firsthand," Blackwood continued, clearly recognizing Montgomery's unspoken doubt. "For now, I suggest rest. The journey from Charleston is taxing, I know from experience. Bennett will escort you back to your quarters." Taking the hint, Montgomery thanked his hosts for the meal and excused himself. Bennett led him back through the now quieter halls of the sanatorium, their footsteps echoing on the marble floors. Few staff were visible at this hour, though Montgomery caught glimpses of orderlies moving quietly through distant corridors. "Dr. Blackwood has great expectations for your contribution to our work," Bennett said as they reached the door leading to the gardens. "Your paper on brain-cooling techniques caught his attention. But it was your treatment of the McHenry girl that truly impressed him." Montgomery stopped short. How could he know about that case? It was never published. Bennett looked momentarily uncomfortable. Dr. Blackwood maintains an extensive correspondence with doctors throughout the eastern seaboard. Word of unusual cases or treatments often reaches him through these channels. Your success with the girl's seemingly incurable condition was mentioned by a colleague in Philadelphia. The explanation was believable, yet Montgomery felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. The McHenry case had been conducted with the utmost discretion at the family's insistence. That Blackwood knew of it suggested sources of information beyond ordinary professional networks. Bennett bade him good night at the doctor's residence, and Montgomery made his way up to his room. As he walked back to his quarters through the now dark grounds, he couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The evening fog had rolled in from the swamps, covering the buildings in mist that transformed familiar shapes into looming specters. From somewhere in the distance came a sound, a cry cut short that raised the hair on his neck. He paused, listening intently, but heard only the normal night sounds of the swamp. Frogs, insects, the occasional call of a night bird. Sleep did not come easily that night. When it did, Montgomery's dreams were troubled by visions of dark liquid flowing through glass tubes and the sound of muffled cries. He saw Blackwood standing over a prone figure, collecting something precious in crystal bottles. The older doctor's face transformed by an expression of hungry desire. He woke several times, his nightshirt damp with sweat despite the cool night air. Morning brought pale sunshine and the distant call of birds from the surrounding forest. Montgomery rose, dressed, and was preparing to seek breakfast when a knock came at his door. He had slept later than intended, the troubled night having finally yielded to exhausted slumber in the early hours. It was the same servant from the previous day, his manner as respectful as before. "Dr. Blackwood requests your presence at morning rounds, sir. If you would follow me." The main building was more active now, with orderlies and nurses moving briskly through the corridors. Montgomery noticed that the staff, while efficient, maintained a certain guardedness in their interactions. Conversations ceased when he approached, eyes averted when he passed. It reinforced his impression of Blackwood Sanatorium as a place of carefully maintained secrets. The servant led Montgomery to the West Wing, where they found Blackwood and Bennett waiting outside a patient's room. Blackwood was dressed as perfectly as the day before, his white hair combed back from his high forehead, his cane resting against the wall beside him. "Good morning, Montgomery," Blackwood greeted him with apparent warmth, though his eyes remained calculating. "I trust you slept well?" "Well enough, thank you," Montgomery replied, unwilling to share his disturbed dreams. He was eager to observe the patients, to see for himself the results of Blackwood's controversial methods. "Excellent. We are about to visit Mr. Jonathan Pierce, age 27, admitted 4 months ago suffering from severe depression with suicidal tendencies." Blackwood consulted a small notebook he produced from his coat pocket. When he arrived, he had not spoken in weeks and required restraints to prevent self-harm. He had made 3 attempts on his own life before his family sought our help, the last nearly successful. "Now you shall see the progress of our methods." Blackwood opened the door to reveal a comfortably appointed room that looked like a gentleman's bedroom rather than a hospital ward. A young man sat in a chair by the window reading a book bound in red leather. Sunlight streamed through the window, lighting up his profile handsome features that showed only the faintest traces of past suffering. He looked up as they entered, his expression calm and attentive. "Good morning, Dr. Blackwood, Dr. Bennett," he said, rising politely. His voice was clear, his movement steady. He placed the book on a small table beside his chair, marking his place with a silk ribbon. "Good morning, Mr. Pierce," replied Blackwood. "May I present Dr. Montgomery, who has joined our staff recently?" Pierce bowed slightly. "A pleasure, Doctor. Have you come from Philadelphia?" "I attended university there before my difficulties began." Montgomery was genuinely impressed. The man showed none of the vacant stare or agitation typical of depressed patients. His manner was composed, his eyes clear and engaged. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Pierce?" he asked, professional curiosity overcoming his reservations about Blackwood's methods. "Quite well, sir," Pierce replied, smoothing the front of his dressing gown. "The darkness that once clouded my thoughts has lifted considerably. I have been able to resume my reading and letter writing. Dr. Blackwood assures me that I may be able to receive visitors from my family next month, should my progress continue." "Excellent progress," Blackwood interjected, his tone blending professional assessment with ownership pride. "And have you experienced any discomfort from your treatments?" Montgomery asked. "None beyond a slight dizziness immediately afterward," said Pierce. "A small price for the relief they provide. I find myself looking forward to the evening drink now. Quite a change from my initial reluctance." The visit concluded shortly after, with Blackwood making notes in his book and promising Pierce a walk in the gardens later that day if the weather held. They moved on to 5 more patients, each showing similar improvement from reportedly severe initial conditions. An elderly woman who had been catatonic now engaged in simple crafts. A middle-aged banker whose violent outbursts had endangered his family now discussed business matters with clear interest. A young lady whose hysteria had shown itself in self-harm now played the piano with delicate skill. Montgomery found himself increasingly intrigued by the results, despite his lingering reservations about the method. If Blackwood's vital essence treatments could indeed produce such transformations, the implications for psychiatric medicine were profound. As they walked between patient rooms, Montgomery asked, "How long before improvements are typically observed?" "It varies by the severity of the illness," replied Bennett, who had been mostly silent during the rounds, allowing Blackwood to lead the presentations. "Some show changes within days, others require weeks. But the success rate is remarkable. Nearly 80% of our patients show significant improvement within 2 months." "And the remaining 20%? Montgomery inquired. "Some conditions prove resistant to any treatment," Blackwood said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "But even in those cases, we often see modest improvements in specific symptoms, if not complete restoration of mental function." Their rounds complete, Blackwood led them to his office, a spacious room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive desk of polished mahogany. The shelves held medical texts in several languages interspersed with artifacts that suggested Blackwood's interests extended beyond conventional medicine. Small statues of Eastern deities, crystal formations, what appeared to be preserved anatomical specimens in glass jars. "Your thoughts, Montgomery?" he asked, settling into a leather chair and gesturing for Montgomery to take the seat opposite. Bennett remained standing, positioning himself near the door as though anticipating the need for privacy. "The results are undeniable," Montgomery admitted, choosing his words carefully. "The patients we visited show remarkable improvement from the conditions you described in their admission records, though I remain curious about the mechanism by which these vital essences affect the mind." "A fair question," Blackwood nodded, placing his fingertips together beneath his chin. "We believe that mental illnesses stem from a depletion of certain elements in the blood that nourish the brain. By reintroducing these elements in concentrated form, we restore the mind's natural balance. It is not unlike providing a starving man with food or a thirsty one with water. We are simply addressing a specific deficiency that conventional medicine has failed to recognize." "And these elements are present in human blood?" Montgomery asked, trying to reconcile Blackwood's theory with his own medical knowledge. Blood had long been associated with temperament and vitality, but modern science was moving toward more mechanical explanations of mental function. "Precisely," said Blackwood, his eyes brightening with enthusiasm. "Though not all blood is equally potent, we have discovered that certain characteristics in the donor produce superior results. Just as some soils yield more bountiful harvests, some individuals produce vital essences of exceptional quality." "What characteristics might those be?" Montgomery pressed, sensing he was approaching the core of Blackwood's methodology. Blackwood smiled mysteriously, the expression failing to reach his eyes. "That, my dear colleague, is the culmination of 20 years of research. I shall share it with you in time, once you have fully integrated into our work here. Some knowledge must be earned through demonstrated commitment rather than merely granted upon request." Montgomery recognized the deflection but chose not to press further for now. There would be time for deeper questions once he had gained Blackwood's trust. When might I begin participating in the treatments? I'm eager to observe the methodology firsthand. Eager, I like that, Blackwood said with evident approval, though Montgomery thought he detected a note of calculation beneath the enthusiasm. You may observe the administration process this evening. If all goes well, you may assist Dr. Bennett tomorrow. We believe in a gradual introduction to our methods. Even the most open-minded doctor requires time to adjust to approaches that challenge conventional wisdom. The rest of the day passed in a tour of the facilities Montgomery hadn't yet seen. The kitchens, where meals were prepared according to dietary principles Blackwood claimed improved the absorption of his treatments. The laundry, where linens were washed in solutions containing herbs believed to promote tranquility. Gardens cultivated with plants selected for their calming properties, and a small chapel for Sunday services, which Blackwood described as essential for the spiritual component of recovery. Throughout, Montgomery noted the efficiency with which the sanatorium operated and the deference, sometimes bordering on fear, that the staff showed toward Blackwood. They executed his instructions with precision but rarely engaged him in conversation or offered suggestions. It was the behavior of people accustomed to unquestioning obedience rather than professional collaboration. Evening brought the treatment hour. Montgomery joined Bennett in a small room adjacent to the laboratory, where patients were brought one by attendants who guided them to comfortable chairs before withdrawing to wait outside. Each received a cordial glass containing their medicine, a dark ruby liquid mixed with wine and herbs to mask its true nature. Bennett explained that the exact formulation varied by patient, with adjustments made based on their response to previous doses. Most patients drank willingly, even eagerly. A few required gentle coaxing. None seemed aware of what they were actually consuming, believing it to be merely another of Dr. Blackwood's healing mixtures. After each dose, patients were monitored for half an hour before being escorted back to their rooms. The effects are cumulative, Bennett explained as they watched a young woman sitting quietly after her dose. Her expression was serene, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Each administration builds upon the last, gradually restoring the mind's equilibrium. Miss Whitley here arrived 6 weeks ago, unable to speak, her mind broken by a traumatic experience. Now she converses freely with the nurses and has begun to process her ordeal through art therapy. And how long does the treatment typically continue? Montgomery asked, observing the woman's calm demeanor. There was something almost unnaturally peaceful about her manner, as though her tranquility existed on the surface while something else stirred beneath. Some patients remain on a maintenance dose indefinitely, Bennett replied, making a notation in a ledger. Others eventually reach a point where the treatments can be tapered and discontinued. Each case is unique, requiring careful monitoring and adjustment. As the session concluded, Montgomery noticed one patient who had not been brought for treatment, a middle-aged man he had seen during morning rounds who suffered from periodic catatonia. He had been introduced as Mr. Sullivan, a former magistrate whose mental collapse had followed a particularly gruesome murder trial. "What of Mr. Sullivan?" he inquired. "Is he not receiving treatment today?" Bennett glanced at Blackwood, who had entered silently during the last patient's session. The older doctor had a habit of appearing without warning, his movements surprisingly quiet for a man who walked with a cane. There was another silent exchange between them, some unspoken communication that excluded Montgomery. "Mr. Sullivan is participating in our program differently," Blackwood said carefully, his tone suggesting that the subject required delicate handling. "Come, Montgomery. There is something else I wish to show you." Blackwood led them down a corridor Montgomery hadn't yet visited, accessed through a door that Blackwood unlocked with a key from his personal ring. Beyond lay another flight of stone steps, descending deeper below the sanatorium. The steps were worn in the center, suggesting centuries of use far older than the sanatorium itself. The air grew noticeably cooler and damper as they descended. Oil lamps cast long shadows on the rough stone walls. The sound of their footsteps echoed ominously in the confined space, creating a disorienting effect that Montgomery found almost hypnotic. At the bottom of the stairs stretched another corridor, with several heavy doors along its length. Each door had a small barred window at eye level and multiple locks securing it. From behind one came the sound of muffled weeping, a woman's voice, young and frightened. "What you are about to see requires context," Blackwood said, his voice low as though concerned about being overheard, though they were far from the main areas of the sanatorium. "Our work here pushes the boundaries of conventional medicine. Some might consider it extreme, but I assure you, every measure we take is in service to the greater good. The advancement of medical knowledge sometimes requires decisions that may seem harsh to the uninitiated." He unlocked the first door and pushed it open. The room beyond was small and barely furnished. A narrow bed, a washstand, a chamber pot. The walls were bare stone, the floor covered with straw like an animal stall. On the bed lay a young woman, perhaps 16 or 17, her wrists and ankles secured with padded restraints that allowed minimal movement. Her skin was unnaturally pale, her breathing shallow. She turned her head slightly at their entrance, but her gaze was unfocused, drifting past them as though seeing something else entirely. "This is Miss Abigail Thornton," Blackwood explained, his clinical tone at odds with the disturbing scene. "Admitted 3 weeks ago, suffering from severe hysteria following an unfortunate incident with a family acquaintance. Her father is a prominent tobacco merchant in Richmond. She is one of our donors." Montgomery's blood ran cold as the implications of Blackwood's words registered. "Donors? You mean?" "Yes," Blackwood confirmed, watching Montgomery's reaction with scientific detachment. "We have found that the vital essence of the mentally afflicted, properly processed, is most effective in treating similar conditions in others, a form of curing, if you will, the principle of similia similibus curantur applied to the realm of mental afflictions." "You're bleeding your own patients?" Montgomery asked, horror rising in his throat. He moved to the girl's bedside, medical training overcoming his shock. Her arms bore multiple puncture marks, some fresh, others healing. Her eyes fluttered open at his approach, dull, unfocused orbs that showed no recognition or awareness. Her pulse, when he checked it, was rapid but weak. "A carefully controlled process," Bennett hastened to add, his earlier confidence replaced by a defensive tone. "No more than is safe to take at any one time, and the donors are selected based on specific criteria that make their essence particularly potent. Miss Thornton's condition renders her uniquely suitable. Her hysteria manifests as visions of remarkable clarity, suggesting an unusual connection to the deeper realms of consciousness." "This is barbaric," Montgomery whispered, unable to contain his revulsion. "These people were entrusted to your care." "And we are caring for them," Blackwood insisted, stepping closer. His expression hardened, the mask of benevolent physician slipping to reveal something colder and more calculating. "Their sacrifice helps dozens of others. Many of them were beyond hope of recovery, violent, self-destructive, lost to reason. Here they serve a purpose. Would you prefer they waste away in restraints? Their existence a burden to themselves and their families. A purpose." Montgomery turned to face him, struggling to maintain his professional composure. "You're treating them as cattle to be bled for your experiments." "Experiments?" Blackwood's voice took on a dangerous edge. "You saw the results yourself this morning. Mr. Pierce, who had attempted suicide 3 times. Mrs. Hargrove, who had not spoken in years. Are these not miracles of modern medicine? Should such progress be abandoned because of squeamish adherence to conventional ethics? I had hoped you would understand, Montgomery. Your paper suggested a mind open to unconventional approaches. Was I mistaken?" Blackwood's tone carried a subtle threat, reminding Montgomery of his isolated position. A stranger in a remote institution controlled entirely by the man standing before him. Montgomery glanced at the girl on the bed, then back to Blackwood and Bennett. He forced his features into a mask of professional interest, suppressing the outrage that threatened to overwhelm him. To reveal his true feelings now would be dangerous, potentially fatal, both to himself and to the unfortunate donors whose plight he had just discovered. "Forgive my initial reaction," he said carefully, measuring each word. "It is unexpected. I would like to understand more about your selection criteria and harvesting protocols before forming a judgment. The concept is certainly novel." He maintained eye contact with Blackwood, hoping his feigned interest would be convincing. Blackwood studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. A reasonable request. The truly great minds in medical history have all faced moments of doubt when confronted with revolutionary ideas. Vesalius, Harvey, Jenner all were initially condemned for challenging the orthodoxies of their time. He seemed pleased with this comparison of himself to historical medical pioneers. Come, there are other donors I wish you to see. The variety of mental afflictions produces corresponding variations in the vital essences, an essential factor in our treatment methodology. They visited for more rooms, each containing a patient in a similar state, sedated, restrained, bearing the marks of repeated bloodletting. Some were younger, others older. All shared a ghostly pallor and the same vacant expression. Blackwood described each case with clinical detachment. The diagnosis, the donor potential, the specific qualities of their vital essence that made them valuable to his program. In the final room lay Mr. Sullivan, the catatonic patient Montgomery had inquired about earlier. Unlike the others, he was deeply unconscious, an elaborate apparatus of glass tubes and silver needles attached to his arm. Dark blood flowed slowly through the tubes into a collection vessel that reminded Montgomery of the leaching devices sometimes used in conventional medicine, though far more sophisticated in design. Mr. Sullivan's condition makes him an ideal donor, explained Blackwood, adjusting one of the valves to regulate the flow. His periods of catatonia can last days, during which we can harvest significant quantities without causing distress. His essence has proven particularly effective in treating melancholic conditions. Something about the quality of his mental state translates to remarkable restorative properties. And what determines which patients become donors versus recipients? Montgomery asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. He needed to understand the full scope of Blackwood's operation before deciding how to proceed. Several factors, replied Blackwood, gesturing for Bennett to check Sullivan's pulse. The nature and severity of their affliction, their physical constitution, their family's financial arrangements with the sanatorium. Financial arrangements? Montgomery echoed, though he had already begun to suspect the economic underpinnings of Blackwood's system. Some families pay a premium for guaranteed treatment, Bennett explained, seemingly relieved to discuss the business rather than the moral aspects of their practice. Others pay reduced fees in exchange for their relatives' participation in our research program. It is a practical arrangement that allows us to serve a broader range of society than would otherwise be possible. I see, said Montgomery, though what he saw sickened him to his core. A two-tiered system where the less affluent were literally bled to benefit those with greater financial resources. And they are aware of the nature of this participation? They are told their loved ones are helping to advance medical science, Blackwood said smoothly, leading them back toward the stairs. The specifics would only cause unnecessary distress. Few families inquire deeply into medical methodologies. They are concerned with results, not processes. Of course, Montgomery murmured, his mind racing. He needed time to process what he'd seen and to plan his next move. Blackwood's operation was more horrific than he could have imagined. Yet confronting him directly would be foolhardy. The sanatorium was isolated, Blackwood's authority absolute. Any premature action might endanger not only Montgomery himself, but the unfortunate souls being exploited in the basement chambers. As if sensing his thoughts, Blackwood placed a hand on Montgomery's shoulder. The touch was light but carried an implicit warning. This is a lot to absorb, I know. Take the evening to reflect. We can discuss any questions you may have over breakfast tomorrow. Bennett and I have correspondence to attend to. The business aspects of running a sanatorium are tedious but necessary. Montgomery nodded, not trusting himself to speak further. They ascended the stairs in silence, the weight of what he'd witnessed pressing down on him like a physical burden. At the top, Blackwood unlocked the door, then carefully secured it again after they had passed through. The key returned to his pocket, a small gesture that emphasized the secretive nature of the donor program and the complete control Blackwood maintained over access to it. Back in his quarters, Montgomery paced the floor, his thoughts in turmoil. What he'd seen violated every principle of medical ethics he held dear. Patients entrusted to Blackwood's care were being bled, sometimes to the point of extreme debilitation, to provide medicine for others. The practice combined the worst aspects of medieval superstition with modern techniques, creating a system of exploitation disguised as treatment. Yet he couldn't deny the apparent effectiveness of the treatments. The recipients he'd observed showed genuine improvement. Could there be some scientific basis to Blackwood's theories, despite the horrific means by which they were implemented? The idea that mental qualities could be transferred through blood seemed absurd, yet the results suggested something was indeed occurring beyond placebo effect. No, he decided after hours of agonized consideration. Whatever benefits might be derived, they could not justify such exploitation. He had to act, but carefully. Blackwood clearly held significant power in the region. A direct accusation might well be turned against Montgomery himself, especially given the remote location and Blackwood's apparent connections with influential families. He needed evidence and he needed allies. Perhaps not all the staff were aware of or complicit in what occurred in those basement rooms. During his tours, he had observed varying degrees of knowledge among the employees. Some seemed fully integrated into Blackwood's system, others kept at a distance from the core operations. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. It was well past midnight. The sanatorium had fallen into the hushed silence of a medical facility after hours. Cautiously, he opened it to find a young woman in a nurse's uniform, her expression anxious as she glanced down the hallway in both directions. "Dr. Montgomery," she whispered. "May I speak with you? It's urgent." Montgomery glanced down the hallway, then ushered her inside, closing the door quietly behind her. She was perhaps 25 with intelligent eyes and the capable hands of someone accustomed to practical work. Her uniform was crisp, but her hair had begun to escape its pins, suggesting a long and stressful shift. "I'm Nurse Collins," she said, wringing her hands. Her voice remained low despite the closed door. "I've been at Blackwood for 8 months. I've seen things." "What sort of things, Nurse Collins?" Montgomery asked gently, gesturing for her to take the chair by the writing desk while he remained standing. He kept his own voice quiet, aware that walls might have ears in an establishment like Blackwood's. Patients disappearing, transferred to the lower levels and never returning to the main wards. Others returning changed weak, confused, as if parts of themselves had been drained away. She took a shuddering breath, steadying herself. "At first, I believed Dr. Blackwood's explanations that they were receiving specialized treatments, but recently I found this." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and handed it to Montgomery. It was a patient ledger page with 2 columns labeled Harvest Schedule and Yield Volume. The entries corresponded to patient numbers, not names, but the implications were unmistakable. One entry caught Montgomery's eye: patient number 47, scheduled for terminal harvest the following week. "Where did you get this?" Montgomery asked, scanning the damning document. The handwriting matched what he had seen in Blackwood's manuscript, precise, flowing script that now seemed sinister rather than scholarly. "It fell from Dr. Bennett's coat pocket last week. He didn't notice." Her voice dropped even lower. "There are others among the staff who have suspicions. We've been afraid to speak, but when we heard a new doctor was coming—" "You took a significant risk coming here," Montgomery said, refolding the paper and returning it to her. "I saw the donor rooms today. Blackwood made no attempt to hide them from me. He seems to believe I will join his enterprise once I understand its methodology." "Then he trusts you," she said urgently, leaning forward. "You could help us expose what's happening here." Montgomery considered his options. The nearest town was miles away, the roads poor. Blackwood's connections with wealthy families suggested he had influence that might extend to local authorities. Any action would need to be carefully planned and executed. "It won't be simple," Montgomery said after a moment. "From what I've seen, Blackwood has influential connections. We'll need irrefutable evidence and a means of getting it to the proper authorities." "The Charleston Medical Society," Nurse Collins suggested. "Dr. Blackwood is scheduled to present his findings there in 2 weeks. Many of the most respected physicians in the state will be present." "That could work," Montgomery nodded, impressed by her strategic thinking. But we'll need documentation, treatment records, patient histories, evidence of the donor program. Something concrete that cannot be dismissed as the fabrications of disgruntled employees. I can help with that, she offered. I have access to the records room during my night shifts. Not everything, but enough to establish a pattern. Good, said Montgomery. But we must be cautious. Gather what you can without raising suspicion. Anything unusual in your behavior might alert Blackwood or Bennett. In the meantime, I'll continue to earn Blackwood's trust and learn more about his operation. They formulated a basic plan. Nurse Collins would collect evidence while Montgomery would feign growing interest in Blackwood's methods, requesting more detailed information about the harvesting protocols and processing techniques. Together, they would compile enough documentation to convince the medical society that intervention was necessary. As she prepared to leave, Nurse Collins paused at the door. There's something else you should know, Doctor. The patients in those basement rooms, they're not the first. There have been others who simply disappeared. Staff who asked too many questions have vanished as well. Are you saying Blackwood has? I'm saying be careful, she whispered. Very careful. Not everyone at Blackwood is what they seem. Watch for the black ribbon. Those who wear it on their uniform are fully in Blackwood's confidence. Trust no one who bears that mark. After she left, Montgomery sat at his desk and began a detailed journal entry, recording everything he had witnessed since his arrival at Blackwood Sanatorium. If something should happen to him, he wanted a record to remain. He wrote until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, then concealed the journal in a false bottom of his medical bag, a precaution he had previously considered unnecessary but now seemed essential. The next several days established a routine. Montgomery participated in morning rounds, observed treatments, and gradually expressed increasing interest in Blackwood's methods. He requested and was granted permission to review patient records, ostensibly to track treatment outcomes but actually to document the fates of those who had been selected as donors. What he discovered chilled him to the bone. Of the 37 current patients, 15 were designated as donors. Their records showed progressive deterioration disguised as treatment side effects. More disturbing were the records of previous patients, dozens who had been admitted over the past 5 years whose files ended abruptly with notations of transferred or released to family care with no further details. Meanwhile, Nurse Collins and 2 other staff members she had cautiously recruited gathered additional evidence. Notes from staff meetings discussing harvest quotas, letters from Blackwood to medical suppliers requesting specialized equipment for blood processing, and most damning of all, a private ledger showing payments received from families for priority treatment alongside lists of donor patients from less affluent backgrounds. On the 5th night after their initial meeting, Montgomery was awakened by urgent knocking. He opened his door to find Nurse Collins, her face pale with fear, her uniform disheveled as though she had dressed in haste. "They know," she gasped, her voice barely audible. "Someone saw me copying records. Dr. Bennett has called for a staff meeting at dawn. Unusual procedures for addressing security concerns," he said. "We need to move now," Montgomery decided, pulling on his coat over his nightclothes. "Are the documents secure?" "Hidden in the chapel beneath the pulpit." She handed him a small key. "This opens the side door. I need to return to my post before I'm missed. If I'm absent during bed checks, they'll know something is wrong. Meet me at the stables at midnight tomorrow," Montgomery instructed. "Bring anyone else who wishes to leave. I'll secure a carriage somehow." She nodded and slipped away into the darkness, her footsteps fading quickly on the gravel path. Montgomery dressed quickly, tucking his journal and the documents he'd already collected into his medical bag. He would retrieve the hidden cash from the chapel, then return to his room and continue the charade until the following night. With luck, Blackwood and Bennett wouldn't realize the full extent of what he knew or who had helped him. The grounds were silent as Montgomery made his way to the chapel, a small stone building at the edge of the sanatorium property. The moon provided just enough light to navigate the gravel paths without a lantern, which might have attracted unwanted attention. He kept to the shadows, pausing frequently to listen for any sign of pursuit or surveillance. The key worked smoothly in the lock. Inside, the chapel was dark save for the faint red glow of the sanctuary lamp. The air smelled of beeswax and incense, an incongruous touch of spirituality in an establishment dedicated to Blackwood's perverse interpretation of medical science. Montgomery felt his way to the pulpit and knelt, running his hands along its base until he found a loose panel. Behind it was a small cavity containing a packet wrapped in oilcloth. As he retrieved it, a floorboard creaked behind him. Montgomery froze, the packet clutched in his hand. "I had such hopes for you, Montgomery," came Blackwood's voice from the darkness. "Such disappointment you have caused me." Montgomery spun around, clutching the packet to his chest. Blackwood stood in the center aisle, a pistol in his hand. The moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows cast colored patterns across his face, giving him an otherworldly appearance. Behind him loomed two orderlies Montgomery recognized from the treatment sessions, large men whose blank expressions suggested complete loyalty to their employer. "Did you truly believe I wouldn't have the chapel watched?" Blackwood asked, his tone almost sorrowful, as though speaking to a promising student who had failed a simple test. "After finding my records disturbed, after noting your too convenient interest in our donor selection process? What you're doing here is monstrous, Blackwood," Montgomery said, rising slowly to his feet. He kept the packet pressed against his chest, aware that it contained the evidence that might end Blackwood's reign of horror. "Using vulnerable patients as living blood banks, it violates every principle of medical ethics." "Ethics?" Blackwood spat the word, his aristocratic demeanor momentarily cracking to reveal the zealot beneath. "What do ethics matter when set against results? My methods work, Montgomery. You've seen it yourself. Incurable cases restored to sanity and function. At the cost of other lives," Montgomery countered, taking a small step to the side, looking for any avenue of escape. "Lives you deemed less valuable, less worthy of care. A necessary sacrifice," Blackwood said dismissively, tracking Montgomery's movement with the pistol. "Every advance in medicine has its price. Do you think the great anatomists of the previous century made their discoveries without breaking societal taboos? Progress requires courage, Montgomery. Courage you clearly lack." "You call this courage?" Montgomery gestured with the packet. "Preying on the defenseless? Deceiving families who entrusted their loved ones to your care? That's not courage. It's the worst kind of cowardice." Blackwood's expression hardened. "Enough philosophical debate. The packet, if you please." He extended his free hand, the pistol unwavering in the other. "I assure you its contents will never see the light of day. My connections extend far beyond this institution, Montgomery. Do you think the families who benefit from my treatments would allow their respectable relatives to be associated with such sordid accusations?" Montgomery weighed his options. The chapel's only exit was behind Blackwood and his men. The windows were narrow, designed to let in light rather than provide escape. He was outnumbered and unarmed. "And if I refuse?" he asked, playing for time. Perhaps Nurse Collins would realize the danger when he failed to return and seek help. "Then these gentlemen will take it from you," Blackwood replied calmly. "After which you will join our donor program. Your blood, I suspect, will yield particularly potent essences. The brilliant ones often do. Imagine the contribution you could make to science, Montgomery. Your vital essence powering recoveries beyond anything you've witnessed thus far." Montgomery tensed, preparing to make a desperate move, when the chapel door burst open. Nurse Collins stood there, a lantern in hand, flanked by three men Montgomery didn't recognize. One wore the uniform of a county sheriff, his badge catching the lantern light. "That's him," she said, pointing at Blackwood. "That's the one who's been bleeding patients and calling it medicine." The men rushed forward. The sheriff, a weathered man with a formidable mustache, called out, "Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, you're under arrest for fraud, false imprisonment, and suspected murder." Chaos erupted. Blackwood fired his pistol, the shot going wide and splintering the wooden pulpit. The orderlies grappled with the sheriff's men, overturning pews in their struggle. Montgomery seized the opportunity to rush Blackwood, knocking the pistol from his hand and tackling him to the ground. "You fool!" Blackwood hissed as they struggled on the chapel floor. His strength was surprising for a man of his years, his fingers clawing at Montgomery's face. "You've destroyed work that could have revolutionized the treatment of mental disease. Your work was built on suffering," Montgomery retorted, pinning the older man's arms. "Whatever value it might have had was poisoned by your methods." The sheriff and his deputies quickly subdued the orderlies. Blackwood, seeing his situation was hopeless, ceased his struggles. As the sheriff bound his wrists, Montgomery turned to Nurse Collins. "How did you—" "When I saw that my cover was blown, I rode for help," she explained, her face flushed with exertion but her eyes bright with triumph. "Sheriff Turner here is my cousin. He's been suspicious of Blackwood for years. Local folk have whispered about strange happenings at the sanatorium. Patients who enter never to be seen again." "We'll need your evidence, Doctor," said Sheriff Turner, a weathered man with kind eyes that belied his forceful demeanor. "And testimony from you and the other staff willing to speak. This has been a long time coming." "You'll have it," Montgomery assured him, handing over the packet from the chapel along with his medical bag containing his journal and the other documents. The next days were a flurry of activity. The sanatorium was placed under the temporary administration of the County Medical Board. The remaining staff, many of whom had been unaware of the true nature of Blackwood's treatments, continued to care for the patients while arrangements were made for their transfer to other facilities. The donor patients were found in varying states of debilitation. Some, like young Abigail Thornton, would require months of recovery. Others had been so thoroughly drained that their prospects were uncertain. Mr. Sullivan, the catatonic patient, had not survived his body discovered in the harvest room, exsanguinated through Blackwood's elaborate collection apparatus. A search of the hidden sections of the basement revealed more horrors. Remains of patients whose utility as donors had been exhausted, detailed journals chronicling Blackwood's experiments dating back nearly a decade, and a sophisticated laboratory where blood was processed into the vital essence administered to the paying patients. The Charleston Medical Society convened an emergency session to address the scandal. Montgomery presented the evidence he and Nurse Collins had collected, along with testimony from former staff and relatives of patients who had mysteriously expired under Blackwood's care. Dr. Bennett, who had attempted to flee when the arrests began, was apprehended in Savannah and returned to South Carolina to face charges alongside his mentor. Both men maintained that their work, however unorthodox, had been in service to medical advancement. The courts disagreed. The trial, when it came, was brief but sensational. Blackwood and Bennett were found guilty on all counts. Bennett, who had cooperated with authorities and expressed remorse, received a life sentence. Blackwood, unrepentant to the end, was sentenced to hang. On the eve of his execution, Blackwood requested a meeting with Montgomery, who had remained in South Carolina to see the case through to its conclusion. They met in Blackwood's cell, a far cry from the elegant surroundings the older physician had once commanded. Blackwood had aged years in the months since his arrest. His once imposing frame now stooped, his white hair lank and unkempt. "Have you come to gloat, Montgomery?" he asked as the young doctor was admitted to the cell. The former director of Blackwood Sanatorium sat on a narrow cot, hands folded in his lap with an eerie composure. "No," Montgomery replied simply. "I came because you asked to see me." Blackwood studied him for a long moment. "I wanted you to know that despite everything, my research was sound. The vital essence treatments worked. Those principles could have saved countless minds lost to madness. Perhaps," Montgomery conceded, "but your methods condemned your discoveries. No ethical physician would build upon research so tainted by suffering." "Ethics evolve, Montgomery," Blackwood said with a thin smile. "What seems abhorrent to one generation becomes standard practice for the next. History will vindicate me." "I doubt that very much," said Montgomery. "Your name will be remembered alongside those who placed ambition above humanity. A cautionary tale rather than a pioneer." Blackwood's smile faded. "You still don't understand the power in blood, particularly blood from certain donors. It's beyond anything in your medical texts. I found something transcendent, something that connects mind to mind in ways science has yet to comprehend. Montgomery frowned. What are you saying? My donors weren't selected at random. Blackwood leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper as though sharing a precious secret. I discovered patterns, Montgomery. Certain minds produce blood with enhanced properties. The melancholic dreamer, the manic genius, the hysteric sensitive, each contributes unique elements to the vital essence. This is madness, Montgomery said, rising to leave. A final attempt to cast your crimes as visionary work. Is it? Blackwood's eyes gleamed with a fervor that made Montgomery step back involuntarily. Then explain why recipients began to manifest traits of their donors, thoughts, memories, skills they never possessed before. I wasn't just treating mental illness, Montgomery. I was creating a communion of minds through blood. Enough, Montgomery said firmly. Save your fantasies for whatever judgment awaits you tomorrow. As he turned to signal the guard, Blackwood called after him. They'll come for my records, my private journals. Men who understand the value of what I discovered. Men who won't be constrained by your precious ethics. This isn't the end, Montgomery. It's barely the beginning. Montgomery didn't look back as the cell door closed behind him. He told himself that Blackwood's words were the desperate ramblings of a condemned man, nothing more. Yet as he walked away from the jail into the gathering dusk, he couldn't entirely dismiss the cold dread that had settled in his stomach. Blackwood was hanged the next morning. Montgomery did not attend. Instead, he was at the Charleston Medical Society presenting his final report on the case and his recommendations for preventing similar abuses in the future. He advocated for stricter oversight of private asylums, regular inspections by independent physicians, and greater transparency in treatment methods. His proposals were well received, though he noted that several influential members seemed uncomfortable with the degree of regulation he suggested. One elderly physician took him aside after the presentation. Your intentions are admirable, young man, he said in a lowered voice, but tread carefully. Blackwood had supporters, powerful ones who believed his work had merit despite his methods. Not all of them have been exposed by his downfall. Are you suggesting that others might continue his research? Montgomery asked, alarmed. The older man glanced around before responding. I'm suggesting that some aspects of medical advancement occur in shadows, beyond the reach of public scrutiny. Always have, always will. He patted Montgomery's arm. You've done good work here. Now I recommend you return to Philadelphia and build your practice. South Carolina holds nothing but danger for you now. Montgomery heeded the warning. 2 weeks later, he boarded a ship bound for Philadelphia, his experience at Blackwood Sanatorium documented in a detailed report he intended to publish in a medical journal. The night before his manuscript was to be submitted, his lodgings were broken into. The report was stolen, along with all his notes and evidence copies. A week later, the Charleston Medical Society's records of the Blackwood case were destroyed in a mysterious fire. Montgomery made no further attempts to publish his findings. He established a modest practice in Philadelphia, specializing in humane treatments for mental afflictions. If patients occasionally remarked on his particular interest in blood composition and his insistence on detailed family histories before accepting new cases, they attributed it to thoroughness rather than paranoia. Years passed. The Blackwood Sanatorium case faded from public memory, overshadowed by war and progress. Montgomery never spoke of it, not even to his closest colleagues, but he kept a watchful eye on medical journals and correspondence, alert for any sign that Blackwood's work had found new practitioners. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of night, he would remember Blackwood's final words to him. This isn't the end. It's barely the beginning. In those moments, Montgomery would find himself checking that his doors were locked, his curtains drawn. For he knew what others did not, that somewhere, perhaps, men in white coats were still drawing blood from the vulnerable, still refining their vital essences, still seeking that impossible communion of minds that Blackwood had claimed to achieve. And sometimes, when a new patient displayed unusual symptoms or spoke of strange dreams that weren't their own, Montgomery would wonder if Blackwood's legacy lived on not in medical texts or formal practice, but in shadow institutions beyond the reach of ethics or law. The truth of what happened at Blackwood Sanatorium in 1803 never fully came to light, but its darkness cast a long shadow, one that perhaps stretches even to our own time. For where ambition meets desperation, where science touches superstition, the temptation to cross moral boundaries remains as powerful today as it was then. Listen closely to the night sounds around old hospitals and asylums. That whisper might be the wind through cypress trees, or it might be the eternal warning. Beware those who offer miracles through methods they refuse to explain. Beware those who claim to heal the mind while seeing patients as mere vessels of vital essence. Beware the modern Blackwoods, with their promises of breakthrough treatments and their locked basement doors. For the hunger for forbidden knowledge never truly dies. It merely waits for the next brilliant mind willing to sacrifice others on the altar of progress.